is an interesting, that picture on the left, it's actually one of my favorite photographs in the book. And I'll tell you a little bit of a background of it. So they had just gotten married, and this was them having their first fight actually.
I remember this.
Yeah.
I remember this very clearly.
In that room, we were about 8 or 9 other cousins who were sitting. सब कोई इधर बैठा है, कोई यहाँ पे बैठा है, कोई मेरे बाजू में, कोई मेरे पीछे. And we are all shouting and laughing and all that is happening. But when you see that picture, you don't get that sense. It's partly in the way that it's been framed. It's also the distance that I was talking to you all about. Okay. It was, the simplest thing would have been to play up that photograph and use it as a large image, because it's a photograph that you as the photographer like. But if you think about it, this idea of the quietness and the silence that we were talking about, okay? So what you see in the book, there is a lot of white space that is being used, a lot of negative space that is being used. And how that image has been made smaller and it's been offset by an image, something that is so routine occurrence in a village, which is something like, the villager I don't think even cares about, a duck kind of swimming. So it's again how it's being constructed. What are the images that are playing against each other? Fish and Bengalis, obviously you can't have enough of. So again, like that sequence is something, it's something that I would be tripping on. Every morning how they would go and catch fish. And, in the night they would cast the net right across the pond. And in the morning, around daybreak is when they would start, getting the net closer and closer to land over here. And then all these fishes are thrashing about. And then they would keep throwing some back which they think are small, not grown enough. Every year I would go, because they would call me in the morning. Jate waqt niche se they would call me, and then I would come down and I would go with them to whichever pond and I would shoot. Now if you think about it, why would you need to shoot that year after year after year? It's a very peculiar thing. The thing that I used to love about this scene was how when these men would be working, I would love how those ducks would be swimming just at that periphery. Okay? But every year, the thing that would be really frustrating would be like how they would be just that little bit, maybe like 2 feet further than where you wanted them. Every year, that's what it would be. So you tried and you said, anyway, let's do it. And imagine 5 days, 5 mornings I would go and shoot it. Okay? And it would never work. There was a year when they were close, but the action here wasn't good enough. Okay, so that's happened as well. Now this is what I mean. So this is what you keep trying, right? Year after year after year, you go and you keep doing it. And then eventually it happened. So at which point you said, chalo, bas karte hain, let's not shoot it anymore. That picture on the left is my little hat tip to that Eugene Smith picture. So you see my whole Life magazine thing where it comes. Okay? That picture which he showed in the Life magazine.
The last one.
Yeah, which was the last photograph from the Family of Man exhibition. Those are actually Eugene Smith's own kids. Eugene Smith had come back from covering a war and he had been injured and he was unable to get out of bed. But he's a photographer, very restless, and he said he saw his kids walk down through that grove, and that's the picture that he made. So that's my little hat tip to that. So while I was reading about Hitchcock and understanding narrative through Truffaut's interviews, reading Ray, I was also kind of, Eugene Smith was a compulsive, unhappy man. Okay, he would constantly be dashing off letters to the editor of Life, to his mother, to some lover, जिसके साथ उसका और कोई relation नहीं, but he would dash off a letter. He would do things like that. So if you read Eugene Smith's writing and stuff like that, which was very often a sort of a stream of consciousness sort of thing, but at the same time could be immensely analytical and, you know, with a lot of erudition and stuff. You also realize that here was Ray, here was Eugene Smith, here was Walter Murch. Walter Murch is a very famous editor who would only work with Coppola and Scorsese and stuff. When you're reading them, you realize three different people from three different worlds. What they're all trying to do is that struggle is the same. That struggle is of creating a narrative. And here was this kid who's trying to do a book and having pretty much the same struggle. Okay? My friends who were writers, who are now very accomplished writers like Jerry Pinto and stuff, were also at the same time working on their first novels. And when we would be traveling together, I realized that his struggle is also the same of trying to craft a narrative. So you see, as storytellers, that's what we are all struggling to do, which is how do you tell the story? Okay? So you see the tropes of the duck, you know, the pond. So, you know, these motifs keep coming back because, you know, that's really what the village is about, right? So this is, you're just about to hit Vijayadashami. Vijayadashami is the day when in our house we would finally be having non-veg as in chicken. Fish we don't consider non-veg. Okay, so that we have every day. So that's the village market. So, you know, मतलब वो गाँव में chicken विकेट आना शुरू हो गए. So in the evenings, usually the family would gather and they would, people would sing and, you know, things like that. So the peculiar thing that also starts happening is, you know, poor people from around the village start assembling from a day before Vijayadashami. And these are the poorest of the poor, meaning, you know, as journalists, I mean, Mukesh would tell you, I mean, we have covered scenes of extreme poverty, you know, where say, food is being distributed and, you know, crowds kind of rushing forward with extended hands and things. These were scenes like that, and I never imagined that I could see it in a setting like this, but I kept seeing it year after year. Clothes would be new. And simultaneously, while that is happening, you know, like this great paradox that our country is, members of my family are all frolicking in the pond behind, okay? And right behind over there is where that chaotic scene is sort of unfolding. Right? I mean, you see how people are kind of sitting down to kind of eat. And I remember seeing little kids, okay, who have come with their mothers, like, you know, like skinny as hell. Itna khaya hai, that eventually when they stand up, na, their tummy is bloated. Wow. Okay, meaning it's that crazy, the kind of, and you know, so we would have discussions like my cousins and this is what my uncles and all, you know, they thought this was a great social thing that they were doing. We would keep saying, like, you know, in today's time, this is like a terrible thing to do. Maybe there are other ways of impacting the community and, you know, I mean, not this showing off. So this is the Visarjan, which I think is one of the toughest things to photograph because, you know, it's such a audio-visual sort of experience. Like today I see all my relatives shooting on the mobile and I'm like, I wish, you know, यहाँ पे थोड़ा audio आ जाता है, you know, because it's a remarkable scene. So what they do is they, you know, because these idols are actually lifted on the shoulders by the local tribals, and they kind of then go in a procession through the village. Okay, so they go in a procession through the village, and because the idols are on their shoulder, the electricity board people come and they disconnect the wires because it can touch the wire and it can fall. So the village is dark, and the only illumination are these mashals. So it's like this crazy kind of sight, right? And it's kind of winding its way through the village. People are going mad, and these darks being played, So this again was not a picture that I had planned. This was not on my Excel sheet. So the reason I keep coming back to the Excel sheet is because it wasn't so rigid, because it's in the nature of a project like this that there would be moments of great illumination that happen and you say shit. I can't be so rigid and avoid it. So I had been photographing the Visarjan for years. Okay. Finally, I said, I think all the boxes have been ticked off. Okay. So I stayed back. This is the same space that you were seeing, where the idol was, where all the characters were doing puja and all that. It's the same place. Those pillars are the same. Those arches are the same. Okay. I happened to stay back, and I was sitting there tired as hell, and I lit a cigarette, and I suddenly see this lady. She's actually the barber's wife. The barber's wife has a certain significance in this sort of thing. She's the one who kind of will paint the altar for the ladies and all that. She is also the general assistant over there. Now that nobody is there, she suddenly emerged out of nowhere and started to clean the place. Now imagine if you didn't have that structure of the whole story in your head, this is not a picture that you would have actually thought of including. You know what I mean? So because that structure was there, you realized that you needed an in-between image between the Visarjan and that, which is the next morning when the scaffolding is pulled out of the water. So this is where the logic and all this kind of becomes important about how it is being crafted. So this is, the wall of the original house. The house where we stay now, this used to be the original house. Even my father and my uncles don't remember that house. So it's